Hi, my name's Nick, and I'm a software engineer at Stile Education. And I'm going to be talking about watching the watches, or generating absent alerts for Prometheus metrics. At Stile Education, we're building an online teaching platform, but we're not about shut-up sheets. The aim is to have a hybrid classroom where teachers use Stile as an aid to teach awesome lessons, in particular science lessons. We're a small engineering team, but we're growing. So check out our jobs page for a whole bunch of awesome engineering jobs. At Stile, we use Prometheus for monitoring our services. It's self-hosted, and it fits into our logging and monitoring stack. Our applications send metrics to Prometheus, or if the application doesn't speak Prometheus, we have exporters that act as glue between the two. We can then use queries to look at those metrics over in time series and see how things are performing. So we can use those queries for graphs, like in Grafana. We can use them for alerting, like what I'm talking about today. And we can also use them in an ad hoc way to get insights about how the things are running. And it generally works pretty well. But when the metrics that you're using for alerts go away, your alerts aren't going to work anymore. And metrics could go away for a variety of reasons. Perhaps the exporter has changed and it's not exporting the same metrics that you expected it to. Or maybe the labels on a metric in your app have changed, but they haven't been updated for the alert rules. And most of these alerts are based on metrics having a certain value. That could be errors over a certain percentage. And so for this, we need the number of errors that are occurring. And if this count of errors that aren't occurring is absent, the alerts aren't going to fire unless you specifically check for the metrics being absent. And we likely care about these metrics going away because our alerts won't work. We just don't want those metrics to be over a certain threshold. So it's worthwhile having some alerts to make sure that they're working as expected. We need some absent alerts. Now, we could go with the manual approach, and that's what we did at Stile for a while. Prometheus provides us with the tools. The absent or absent over time function will be true if that metric is absent. And that's what I've done in the example here. So we've taken the selector, the bit inside the average over time function, and we've joined it with the expression with the OR connective, and then wrapped that selector in the absent over time function because it's a range vector. And so this alert will fire if that selector disappears. But there's a few problems with this. We need to remember to do this every time for starters. And it's also an annoying mechanical process. It's easy to do, but repetitive tasks are annoying. And it makes complex expressions more difficult to read. Sounds like toil. Let's automate it. Before we jump into how alerts are generated, I want to take a quick foray into the anatomy of a Prometheus expression to provide some context. This is a basic Prometheus expression that I've got up on the slide here. And you can have a lot more complex ones than this, but really they're built up of smaller ones and simpler ones like this. And what we really care about is that selector that I've got marked here. And so it must have a metric name, in this case, network bytes in. And then it can optionally have some labels and a range. So in this case, we're filtering the metric down to the service crocodile, and then looking at over a range of 15 minutes. And because it has this range, we refer to it as a range vector. If it didn't have the range, it would be an instant vector. So we want to know when these selectors are not being exported. To do this, we need to generate some alert rules. And alert rules look like this. Alerts have a name in that alert field there, and there are some illegal characters. So when we're automatically generating the name, we do have to be a little bit careful. Then there's an expression. And so the alert will fire if that expression is true. You can control how long that expression has to be true for before the alert fires with the for field underneath. So this says that if the API errors percentage is greater than 10 for 30 seconds, the alert will fire. Then we have some annotations, the summary and the description, which give the alert a bit of flavor when it wakes you up in the middle of the night. And you can also have some labels, and they're really useful for filtering, but they can be pretty company specific, so I'm not going to dig into them here. So what do we need to do? First, we need to parse all those rules that we have in our YAML files. You've got alert rules, and then you also have recording rules, which look similar. They have different fields, but the key is that they share that expression field. And so for all of those rules, we're going to parse that expression field and get the selectors out. For all of the selectors, we're then going to generate some absent alert rules. And so the expression for that alert is just that selector that we got, wrapped in the absent function if it's an instant vector, or the absent over time function if it's a range vector. Then we need to add that metadata, the name, the for field, and those annotations, the summary and the description. And with this tool built, we then want to run it anytime we change our Prometheus rules files, so we regenerate those absent alert rules, and we don't have to write them manually ever again. So at Stile, we have the tool running in our CI system. And whenever you make changes to the Prometheus alert rules, or the rules in general, a bot will run this tool, and then it will commit something like this to your pull request. It adds to this absent.rules.yaml file, which is fully automatically generated. We don't edit it by hand. But other than that, it's like any other rules file that we have in our code base. Then once this is deployed, they're just like any other alerts. And what's really awesome about this is we get to piggyback on all of our other Prometheus infrastructure, all that work that we've done to make it high availability, all the time and energy engineers have spent understanding how Prometheus works and how alerting works. And perhaps most importantly, we don't have another moving part in production. So how's it gone? We've been using this tool in our CI system for about 8 months now, and it's led to multiple improvements in our alerting system and just generally improved our sense of confidence in it. So we've improved alerts by moving towards using range vectors to smooth out stuttering metrics rather than using that for field. And this actually is because of a limitation in the tool and the way that it derives that for field. And it's not always the value that makes sense in that context. But by using a range vector, it's included in the selector, and so it's always going to be the right range. And this is an example of fitting our workflow to the tool, but I think it's a small enough case, and in some cases has led to the expression being easier to read. We've also changed the startup of some of our services to initialize important counters to 0, particularly for things like error counts, which under normal conditions, these metrics would be absent, but we really care if they go away because our error alerts aren't going to work anymore. This is a bit of a trade-off. So by initializing these metrics to 0, we're circumventing the way that Prometheus lazily creates time series to save space and improve performance. But we haven't done this in very many cases, and we haven't noticed any impact on Prometheus's performance. And for things that we don't care as much about, we have a bit of a get out of jail free card, where we have a text file where we list the metric names that we don't want to generate absent alerts for. It's also helped us triangulate problems with services going down. So we use certbot to regenerate our SSL certificates as required. And sometimes, as services do, it would go down. And we'd get spurious alerts about our certificates being about to expire, when really it was that certbot was down or it wasn't exporting the metrics. And so now with these separate absent alerts, we know that that's what the problem is. It's not that our SSL certificates are about to expire, which we would respond quite differently to. And finally, we found metrics that weren't being exported. So Stile is 100% in AWS, and some of the metrics we want have to be exported from CloudWatch. And every metric costs money, so we only want to export the ones that we really care about. And this is done by configuring the CloudWatch exporter, a separate configuration file. And so somewhere along the lines, we'd changed the CloudWatch config, the CloudWatch exporter config, such that the metrics that it was exporting were different to the ones used in our alerts. So our alerts were using metrics that were absent. When we wrote this tool, generated the absent alerts file, deployed it, we suddenly got inundated with all these CloudWatch metrics that didn't exist. They were absent. And so then we could quite easily fix our alerts by using the metrics that were being exported, or we could modify our CloudWatch config so that our CloudWatch exporter config so that it did export the ones that we wanted. So this has been running in CI for 8 months. And once sort of after the initial rollout, the tool really hasn't required any changes. It's been one of those unicorns that's just slotted in and generally improved our lives while staying out of the way. There are other things that we could do with this tool though, or in the area of improving the reliability of our alerting. So we could use PromTool to do unit testing. And this is actually still an area of interest to us, but it covers a slightly different problem domain to what these absent alerts do. So the PromTool are unit tests, whereas these absent alerts are more akin to smoke tests, checking things that are working as it is in production. Another thing that we could do is improve the way that for field or for clause is derived, because it has meant that we've had to change the way that some of our alerts are written to fit with the tool. So in general, it's been fine, but it would be really good if we just didn't have to do that. And finally, at the time of recording this talk, we're talking about open sourcing the tool, but haven't been able to get around to it yet. So it would be really awesome if we do that, because I think a lot of people could benefit from this. Thank you.